Is this really a bad time to be a convention artist? I'm seeing a lot of videos about conventions being dead, but is this a simplification of the market? I just went to Otakon and Gen Con back to back and had very different experiences at both of them. I'm going to use these as an example for a deep dive on what I think is happening within the convention space and how the market is changing, and whether this is worth it for you to still consider conventions as a potential option for financial stability. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on how the issues with the economy are affecting us as artists trying to make a living in this space. It's no secret that the US economy is not doing great at the moment, but it is clear that competition in the space has skyrocketed, but that doesn't mean everybody has to be a god-tier painter. It's not necessarily the best artists that are succeeding. It's becoming more apparent that innovation is required. What is making those succeed? Maybe their branding is on point. Maybe their products are on point. Maybe they are a god-tier painter. But I know people who have almost zero drawing skill and are still making this work. But I can guarantee you they're good at one of those categories, at least, if not more. But that being said, why are even some of the larger shows flopping for some established artists out there? Spoiler alert, I did not do well at Otakon this year. I think the reasons on why that happened are not super black and white, as I know a lot of people who did do well, and Otakon historically for me has always been a really good show, so this year definitely was an outlier. And analyzing what issues that some artists face this year is something you might be able to apply to your future local shows as well. And now Gen Con, one of our best shows of the year, knocked it out of the park, S tier. But Gen Con brings more of a niche audience that kind of fits my work a little better. So for this video, I want to focus mostly on Otakon, as I think the demographic is closer to what you might see at your local convention, more of a general anime feel, anime being super popular and all. And I think this might be a better indicator on why you might be having some issues or even why you are having some successes. My hope that this analyzation will apply to the widest audience as possible. But always keep in mind what works for one artist may very well not work for the other. Everybody's experience is different. This was never more apparent than at this year's Otakon. Okay, I want to start off with prefacing this by I know that this is a lot of money and that I'm in a very privileged position, blah, 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 blah. This is an analytical video, so we've got to look at the numbers. Just know that this is not me complaining about the number or trying to show off or whatever connotation that you might take from it. This is just to analyze the market. Okay, with that being said, let's take a look. So this year at Otakon, I made $6,500 for the whole event.
Yo, Dustin's a little bitch. He comes in here and he's like,
I made $60 million. I hate my life.
Little bitch.
That's going in.
Yeah.
That's a good amount of money to make in a weekend, but that is way under my average, and it is way under my Otakon average. That is a third of what I made the last time I was at Otakon. Otakon is historically considered to be a top tier event. But I think there is a number of reasons due to the economy and how that is affecting the convention space that is making artists, and even established artists, not just myself, typical income at these events less standard and a bit more risky. And although we still left with a profit, it definitely wasn't what I expected. And that's okay. $6,000 still buys me a lot of Pokemon cards. I'm having a good time. But why such an insane drop? A 66% drop is the highest drop I have ever seen from a convention. If anything was consistent, it was that it was inconsistent on how people were doing. Everybody I talked to was all over the place. There was no standard consensus on whether the show was good or bad. I know a couple artists who broke the record. I know a couple artists who were way down. I know a couple artists who were right about where they expected. I know a couple artists who were 25% down. I know a couple artists who were 25% up. I know a couple artists who didn't even make their table costs back. It was all over the place. Now, looking at Otakon specifically, which is in the DC area, there's a couple big factors involved. Katsucon, also a huge convention in the DC area. MagFest, also a huge convention in the DC area. AwesomeCon, also in the DC area. And there's a few others. And now all these conventions have been in the DC area for years. Why is this now just becoming an issue? Why would this affect artist sales? They've always competed with each other, and they've all been really good events. Well, I think with the economy, People are still going to conventions, but they're picking their favorite ones. A couple years ago, when people had a little bit more money, maybe you would go to every single event. And now all of these conventions appeal to the anime crowd, but some of them appeal to niches within the anime crowd a bit more than others. Where Otakon has more of a general anime vibe, MagFest definitely appeals more to the gamers. Katsucon definitely appeals more to the cosplayers. If you can only budget for one show, you're gonna pick the one that speaks more to you. And I think we're seeing that everywhere. Shows that feel similar within the same area, I think are gonna suffer the most. Any shows that are really niche or unique in the area, this is what is going to get people's attention. This is what people are going to save up for and travel for. The biggest, baddest show in the area also might have the same benefit. Your anime expos, your San Diego Comic Cons. This is why, say, in the LA area, cons like WonderCon or LA Comic Con or Anime Pasadena or Anime Chibi might be struggling to compete with other local events. This might have something to do with Anime Chibi's new questionable guidelines that they backtracked on, but that's for a different video. If you want to make a lot of money at an artist alley, make sure to pick shows that people are traveling to. If it's a locals only show, this might be a day trip for somebody. It's not that people aren't going to show up, but they might not be saving up for it. It might not be the same thing. You want a show or an event that appeals to people so much that they are willing to travel for it. And that means that they're going to save up for it. And that means that they're going to probably go into the artist alley. If the show only appeals to locals, not necessarily a bad show, but there's going to be a less spending power in the room. That's just naturally how it's going to work. And that's why I think, say, in LA, only the biggest, baddest shows are really pulling any profit for artists, or the really niche events. Shows like Lightbox Expo, that's very specifically for artists. Although it's a smaller venue, there's no other shows in the country like it. You could also say the same with a show like Off-Kai for VTubers. Very unique, small venue, but this is something people travel for that are interested in that unique niche thing. The DC area has 3-4 major events that are all similar-ish. So although Otakon is the largest event in the region, it doesn't really stand out over the other ones. As again, we've talked about Katsucon and MagFest appealing very directly to very specific audiences that might be pulling people away from Otakon. And now, if your artwork appeals to a more general audience, your sales might not have dropped as drastically as, say, mine at a show like Otakon, where generally I really need those gamers to show up to make that sweet, sweet dough. And although anime cons specifically normally aren't my perfect demographic, I still normally do quite well at them. Anime Boston, one of my best shows of the year. Anime Expo, still a very decent event for me. And even some smaller events still outpaced a massive show like Otakon. And I think this is because of what's happening in the economy and the other shows that are in the region. So this is something to think about when you're picking events to table at, I think. And obviously, when the economy is booming and everybody has a lot of extra money and they're going to go to every single show in their region because they're bored and they want something to do and some stuff to spend and some art to put on their wall, then this issue might just not be an issue. But currently, where people have a lot less spending power, generally speaking, us artists are going to feel that a lot more. Now, despite my lackluster performance at Otakon, I do want to give them a proper review. And I do think there are some things that have always kind of annoyed me about Otakon, and some things that I think they do really well. But because the show has always been so profitable, it's kind of made those annoyances bearable. So here are a few things to keep in mind if you're considering the show for the future. So proxies are not allowed at Otakon. Fair enough. The topic of proxies has gotten very controversial, especially with the increase of competition within the artist alley space. But what this tells me is that there is some benefit for the show of the artist physically being there. So if there's some sort of draw for the artist to physically being there, we are making your event better. And now, I know a lot of events will say that the artist alley is cheaper because they want to support artists and whatever, blah, 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 blah. But even if that's true, which I don't believe you, the artist alley at a lot of shows is one of the main draws for attendees. And of course, getting to meet the physical artist. Cosplayers, voice actors, and all that are typically paid for their appearance at these events as celebrities. And although a lot of artists might not have the same notoriety, the artist alley as a whole is definitely bringing in way more people than any individual guest ever could. So you want us to bring in crowds for you to profit off of us and us pay you. And now this is a symbiotic relationship because we're making money, and to an extent, this makes sense. To an extent. I want to talk about the discrepancy between some table pricing. And I think Otakon is unfortunately one of the worst culprits in this, as some of their pricing just doesn't really make sense to me. And I fail to see some of the logic. First off, there's their standard table, which is your typical Artist Alley like 6-foot table. Or at least that's how it's listed on their website. Then there is unlimited space, which is a 10 by 10 booth. And unlimited essentially means that you can have as much fan art as you want, as all the other booths and tables are required to have a minimum of 50% original work. The other options are standard table and standard booth. Standard booth used to be their pro row, their juried section, which is also a 10 by 10 space, mixed in with the unlimited booths. So they're kind of indistinguishable. The only difference is the standard booth, the 10 by 10 standard booth, is not allowed to have unlimited fan art. They have to abide by the 50-50 rule. However, their booths are cheaper. It's about $900 for their booths, where the unlimited booths are $1,100. So you're being charged more for having fan art, and it's not like the booths are in a different section. But it gets stranger. Somebody like me who has mostly original work and not a lot of fan art, obviously, I want that cheaper booth that is the same exact size. But no, they didn't accept me into that section this year. They accepted me into unlimited, where all the fan artists were desperate to get unlimited spaces, but then here I am taking one of their spots, and they're stuck either in a standard table or a standard booth, and everybody's confused and frustrated. I will say my first annoyance is, so we paid for an unlimited table, which is like very similar to the pro row here, and the tables were about $1,100, and you only got a 6-foot table, so we had to bring our own. I'm on a corner, so that's nice. So I purchased one from Walmart, and then I got one for Sang as well, because why would you have a 6-foot table in a 10 by 10 booth? It's kind of crazy. But the crazy thing is, the even crazier thing, I should say, is if you got a normal standard table, which is much cheaper. I think it's $400 something. I'm not sure. I'll double check. But you automatically get an 8-foot table. So you spend triple the amount of money for a smaller table. Granted, you're allowed to bring extras, but it's just, I don't know, it's frustrating. And they said that you could order an extra table here at the con for an extra $200. So for a $1,300 table, I could then get a bigger table. I don't know. I don't love that. A little penny pinching going on there, I think. I do think that the majority of these issues is on the convention center, but also Otakon agrees to the contract that they have with the convention center. So infrastructure around the DC Convention Center is not great. Although the convention center itself is very nice, the drop-off zones are fused with the bus lanes, and it's just kind of a nightmare to bring a car in or travel to this convention center specifically. And there is a loading dock. However, the trend has been that conventions are now forcing people who had paid to have spots at that event to also pay to use the loading dock. So essentially the convention center doesn't want you to use any roll carts or anything like that, makes things easy to bring into the convention center through the front of the building. But then they charge you to use the loading dock. So I've already spent $1,100 on a booth, which is very much on the high end for what Otakon offers in an artist alley. And then on top of that, I can only hand carry things through the front door, which if you're anything but just a print artist is going to take a million trips and is not very easy at all. But if you do choose to do the loading dock, they will charge you $145 for anybody coming in with a car and $280 with anybody coming in with an SUV. I think there's even larger charges for if you're coming in with a U-Haul or a bigger vehicle than an SUV. But these were the numbers that I was told from some people who had tried to use the loading dock. Like, I've already paid for the spot, but now you won't let me set up without charging me more? I don't know. And this is not just an Otakon issue. A lot of convention centers are adopting this. And I think these conventions need to find a solution with the venues in their contracts to figure this situation out, because it is a nightmare. Setup at Otakon is the hardest day of the show. At least it was for me. To get down into the hall to set up, you have to go down 40 flights of escalators. But wait, is there an elevator? Sort of, if the security at the time deems you worthy enough to allow you to use it, where you can cram yourself in the tiniest elevator imaginable for a convention center of this size, but you're not there yet. I hope you like lines because you're gonna be here a while. And if you have to take multiple trips, then you can just multiply this indefinitely. So either way, setup is going to suck. I don't like starting day one already exhausted. And I'm primarily a print artist. I don't have that much stuff to bring in. Otakon would have had to been a lot more profitable, like a lot more profitable for me to want to deal with this again. Now, if I'm local, maybe it's worth the trouble. As somebody coming from the other side of the country, this kills my excitement for the show. And I love going to conventions. I love meeting you guys. I love the whole experience, but this being at the front end of it and the back end of it, just no thank you. Okay, sorry for the rant. With that all being said, I actually do have some praise for the Artist Alley staff at Otakon. So although this is not my story to tell, there was some art theft issues at the show this year, and the staff handled it extremely well, much better than I would have expected from what I've seen at other events. So if you know, big praise there. They also were walking around and asking artists if they needed a break and would watch your booth for a while. So that's always very much appreciated. So as much as I have some criticisms for the event, I think the staff are lovely and have done a great job and take a great care of the artists once you physically get into the hall, if you can manage to do that. Now, when deciding if you're going to go to a particular event or not, I think we really need to start considering what other events are in the area. What other things are competing with this show? The smaller the event, the more things that are around it. These start to make that event more of a gamble for us artists looking for a profit. Obviously, traditional ways of making money as an artist, like animation and gaming and stuff, are getting sparser and sparser. So making sure that we go to profitable events that isn't going to suck up all of our profits with different expenses is going to be really important. I think areas like Florida or SoCal are very affected by this, where the market is massively flooded with lots and lots of events. And in Florida, there's not really a clear winner on what show is the best one to go to. So artists are kind of spreading themselves thin, and so are attendees. On top of it being hard for non-locals to go to these events. And when every town wants to have their own anime convention, it really hurts the market as a whole. Especially when none of them are innovating or doing anything unique or interesting. Sorry, Florida. Where SoCal, it's a bit more clear. AX, San Diego, people are going to save up and go to those and kind of not give the other ones a lot of attention. There's other factors on also the average skill level of artists within an area. Coming back to LA again, attendees are just frankly spoiled. Everybody here is so skillful. This is where the animation industry is. Everybody is like a super professional trained artist, and the normal person off the side of the road sees us all the time. They're not going to be impressed by your art prints unless it really, really stands out and is something unique. Where, like, say, in the Midwest, if any one of these animation artists show up, they're gonna look pretty good. The average skill level in those areas are not as high. And although those events might be smaller, it might be a little easier to stand out in the hall and make more money. And I'm sure there's similar issues within other countries that I'm just not familiar with. So if you know those areas better, try to think about these things when picking an event and determining if it's going to be worth it for you. Obviously, we never know for sure until we show up and we make a ton of money or don't, but it's always good to make an educated decision when it comes to your finances and your livelihood. That being said, that's all I have for today. So if you could, please like and subscribe. Desperate YouTuber talk, blah, 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 and I will see you in the next one.